All right, so we are here to talk about CAM plants. CAM stands for crassulacean acid metabolism. Crassulacean is just the name of the group of plants, kind of like we're mammals, or I'm not exactly sure what level it is, but it's a taxonomic categorization for that group, and it includes like your pineapples and things like that. Acid, because we are going to be talking about organic acids. Now, these are different than when you think of like hydrochloric acid. That's not the kind of acid we're talking about, but a different kind of acid. And then metabolism, just because it involves chemical reactions, and that's all metabolism means. So we're going to talk about this, what CAM plants do. So again, they are trying to, just like your C4 plants, they are trying to avoid the process of photorespiration. So photorespiration is when rubisco, instead of joining to CO2, it joins oxygen to the 5-carbon. That breaks into a 3-carbon and a toxic 2-carbon, and that toxic 2-carbon has to be broken down using the mitochondria and bits of that respiration process. And so that's why it's called photorespiration, because it's coming from photosynthesis, but it's having to do some respiration. And instead of making ATP, it's using ATP. And so plants don't want to do it because they don't want to waste energy. And so I've already done a video on C4 plants. If you're not sure about that, make sure you go watch that and how they prevent photorespiration. And now we're going to talk about CAM. So CAM plants, unlike C4, they don't have a different structure per se. Like they don't have those bundle sheath cells and all that. So they don't physically separate rubisco and oxygen, but they're going to rely on probability. So they're going to try to keep their CO2 levels really high compared to oxygen, so that when rubisco reaches out to grab something, more likely it's going to grab CO2 because there's more CO2 there. And so CAM is going to do what we call a temporal process, which means time, whereas C4 plants did a physical process. They separated the rubisco and the O2 physically, put them in 2 different cells. The CAM plant is going to use time. So what CAM plants do is they are going to close their stomata during the day. So when the sun is out, their little stomata are closed. Okay? At night, so when the sun goes bye-bye, and chances of me drawing a moon, wow, y'all, I can't even draw a moon. That's pretty sad. Anyway, that's supposed to be a moon. When the moon comes out, they are going to open their stomata. And so what they are going to do all night long is they're going to bring in CO2. So pretend like this is a leaf and these are all the stomata. And just all night long, CO2, 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 CO2. They're going to release any oxygen from the day. They're going to bring in CO2 all night long. But they don't just want CO2 floating around in their cells, so they join it with other molecules to convert it to organic acids. One that we see a lot is malic acid. Okay, and you don't need to know that, but in case you see that, that's what it's talking about. And so all we're going to do is we're going to add, and I don't know if it's always a 3-carbon, sometimes it's a 3-carbon, but we're going to add these CO2s to some other carbon molecules, turn them into an organic acid, and then we're going to pack them into a vacuole in the cell. And a vacuole, if you'll remember, is kind of like a closet. So we're just going to pack them in there for storage. So all night long, we're bringing in CO2, bringing in CO2, bringing in CO2, bringing in CO2, getting those CO2 levels sky high. We let all our oxygen out. We're not producing any oxygen at night because you got to have the light-dependent reactions to make oxygen, and we don't have any light. So basically, when these plants wake up in the morning, they don't sleep. So when the sun rises, you're going to see their CO2 levels up here, and their O2 levels are basically, I won't say 0, it's really about a proportion. So it's not that the O2 levels are absent, it's just that compared to the CO2, there's very little oxygen. So when rubisco grabs something, it's going to more likely grab a CO2 because there's just more CO2 there. Now, as the day goes on, they're going to do the light-dependent reactions, which is going to produce oxygen. They're going to do the light-independent reactions, which requires CO2. And so what we're going to see happening throughout the day is we're going to see this start to drop, and we're going to see this start to rise. And so as the day goes on, we're going to see our CO2 levels dropping and our oxygen levels are rising. And so we may see some photorespiration later in the day, but compared to a C3 plant that doesn't have any way of handling this, we see very little respiration compared to those. So again, CAM plants are doing a temporal. They're closing their stomata during the day so they don't lose that water when it's hot, but they're opening them at night so that they can bring in tons of CO2 and get that CO2 level really high. So I can explain the process that CAM plants use to prevent photorespiration, and that is just that they maintain high CO2 levels by bringing it in all night long and get rid of O2 levels all night long, so they have low O2 levels. I can explain why CAM plants only open their stomata at night. CAM plants tend to live in hot and dry environments, so they want to close their stomata during the day so that they don't lose excess water, but at night it's generally cooler and there's no sunlight, there's no radiant energy pulling that water out. And so yes, they're still going to lose some water at night, but not nearly as much. And so that's why they only open their stomata at night. I can explain the role of organic acids in CAM plants. Organic acids are how we're going to store all of this CO2. So basically you take that little CO2 and you join it with this big old acid, and then that goes into the vacuole and it gets stored for the night. So the organic acids are basically kind of like a babysitter for the CO2. Or a bed for the CO2 to sleep in, whatever analogy you want to put in your brain to help you remember. But it's just something that the CO2 can attach to that'll kind of stabilize it and keep it safe until morning. And then lastly is I can explain how diversity increases survival. So they've thrown a little bit of evolution in this unit, but I think it's not necessarily a bad thing. The more diverse your population, I was about to say your society, but your population, the more likely you are to survive. So if all plants were C3 plants and we went into a drought, we went into a famine, we went into the opposite of an ice age where the whole earth got hot and dry, a lot of those plants would die because C3 plants cannot handle hot, dry environments. They either close their stomata and do photorespiration, or they open their stomata and lose a bunch of water and dehydrate and die. So it's like a lose-lose. But because we have this diversity, because we have C3 plants, but we also have C4 plants and we have CAM plants, we have plants that can survive. So if the whole earth did get hot and dry, yeah, a lot of our C3 plants would die, but because we've got that diversity, it allows us to, allows plants, not us, but allows plants to survive even in those hot and dry environments. And so that's the benefit of diversity. When your environment changes, and it always will, if you have a diverse population, some of those members of your population will be able to handle that change because we all have different genes that give us different strengths and weaknesses. And so if we have a strength that we're not using right now, but in the environment changes, that strength becomes really valuable, that those who have that strength will be able to survive and those who do not will die. And so that's why diversity is really important. If everybody were exactly the same and the environment changed, your whole species would go extinct, and that's not what we want. So that's one example. The CAM and C4 plants are one example of diversity. The pigments are another. Chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B are really good at bringing in red and blue light, but there's a whole spectrum. You've got Roy G. Biv, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. If you're only bringing in really reds and blues, you're missing a lot of other lights. And it could be that due to certain situations in your environment, maybe you're exposed to more orange light or yellow light or green light even. And if all you have is chlorophyll A and B, then you're not going to be able to handle those situations as well as those scenarios. But by having these accessory pigments, that allows you to take advantage of more of the light spectrum and bring in more colors of light, which increases your chance of survival. So diversity is good because it increases chances of survival. By giving some people or plants or whatever strengths and others weaknesses, so that if that environment changes, hopefully at least some of the population will survive. Unfortunately, biologically speaking, it's not important that the entire population survive. Now, as humans, that's what we want. We don't like people to die. But from a biological, take your emotions out of it perspective, as long as some humans survive and keep the species alive, then biologically we're doing okay. And so that's kind of what you're going to see with plants and animals. They're going to fight to survive, even if it means keeping their kids alive and they die. That's still okay because they're still keeping some of their genes alive. And so you'll see that sacrificial kind of attitude in nature a lot of times. So anyway, that's the benefit of diversity. That's canned plants. If you have any questions, let me know.